Chapter 6 Venom. They'd set up camp in a jungle clearing, with the trainees' two-man tents arranged in a semicircle around a fire. The instructors and assistants had more luxurious tents that were tall enough to stand in, and whereas trainees had to hike with their accommodation on their backs, the instructors' equipment had been delivered by land cruiser and their tents erected by local guides who lived in a fishing village across the island. It was dark now. James had washed at a nearby spring, but even at night, the jungle heat was intense. He was in the tent he shared with Kazakov, sitting on an upturned crate, wearing only cargo shorts and boots, while a crackly Malaysian radio station played Michael Jackson and a million insects dive-bombed the outside of the tent, attracted by the glow from the electric lantern hooked to the ceiling. Mr. Kazakov lay on a metal-framed bunk, applying foul-smelling glue to a pair of Russian army boots. "You can get these from the storeroom on campus," James said, as he kicked his state-of-the-art, lightweight, air-cushioned, waterproof but breathable boots in the air. "They're dead comfy." "It makes you soft," Kazakov spat. "Luxury doesn't make a good soldier. All this fancy equipment you Westerners use is just more things to go wrong." It said something about Kazakov that James had spent 5 nights sharing a tent with him, but still didn't know his first name. It said even more that he'd taken British citizenship and worked for various government organisations over a 15-year period, but still thought of British people as "you Westerners." James smiled as he moved across to his camp bed and yawned. "They're a lot easier on your feet than hard-soled Russian boots, that's all I know." Kazakov tutted, before leaning forward and wagging his finger. "During World War II, the German soldiers had the best technology. But when the snows came, the German equipment froze and supply lines broke down. The Russian soldiers didn't even have warm coats, but they were peasant stock, used to going hungry and surviving on scraps. While the Germans starved, Russian troops pulled up trees and bushes and stewed the roots until they were soft enough to eat. And if those Russians hadn't boiled up those roots, Germany would have won the war and Britain would be a German colony." James shook his head. "I reckon the Americans might have had something to say about that." Kazakov laughed. "The Americans don't like to fight dirty. Look at Vietnam. Look at Iraq. I wear these boots because they're the same kind I used in Afghanistan. And they work just fine. I know my knife because it killed in Afghanistan. I've worked with your SAS, and I've seen SA-80 rifles and Glock machine pistols jam. I carry a Kalashnikov because you can walk out of a swamp or a sandstorm and know that a bullet comes out when you pull the trigger." Kazakov only ever became animated when talking about war or weapons. James couldn't help smiling. "You actually like all this, don't you?" "Like what?" "Living in the jungle, washing out your clothes by hand, patching up your kit." "I have no family," Kazakov shrugged. "The only thing I know is being a soldier. And a good soldier sticks with equipment he can trust." James lay back on his bed. He thought of himself as a tough guy, and compared to most 15-year-olds he was. But he was nothing compared to the Russian. "It's time," Kazakov said, cracking a rare smile as he splashed the dregs from his canteen over James's bare stomach. "Go get the snakes. I'll prepare the rifles and ammunition." James unzipped the tent quickly and ducked into the night before the insects got a chance to pour in. The 2-room command tent set up next door was presently empty. Dana had travelled with a local guide, taking the Land Cruiser deeper into the jungle to set up equipment for the trainees' rafting expedition for the next morning. Mr. Pike had taken Joe McGowan to a hospital on the mainland. When James was a trainee, he'd assumed that Cherub instructors had free rein to commit acts of cruelty. In fact, the 100-day training course was meticulously planned. Every exercise took a massive organisation and involved a complicated safety audit as well as careful consideration of what 10 to 12-year-old trainees were capable of. One of the guiding principles of training was that the pupils should always be uncomfortable. They were taught to expect the unexpected and to live with a little less food and sleep than they were used to. Tonight was going to be no exception. James yawned as he walked around the back of the command tent to a pile of crates and boxes that had been unloaded from the boat. There was a glimmer of moonlight, but he needed his pocket lamp to read the laminated tags dangling from each crate. He moved the torch beam back and forth until he found the boxes marked Day 96, Exercise 7B, Live Cargo. The box was made from blue plastic, and as he lifted it, the contents writhed around and bodies slapped against the plastic sides. After resting his torch on the ground, James peeled off a strip of parcel tape. As he raised up the lid to peek inside, a blaze of light from a hot lamp blinded him. The lamp was set on a timer and designed to switch on and make the cold-blooded snakes inside hyperactive. The pinkish-grey creatures snapped their jaws and began poking their heads into the gap beneath the lid, forcing James to slam it down in a panic. The reptiles were Malaysian pit vipers. Although they were only babies, they would normally carry enough venom to kill a small human. However, these vipers had undergone a minor operation to remove their venom-producing glands, and as a result, the only injury they could inflict was a nasty bite from their powerful jaws. But of course, the sleeping trainees had no idea that they were harmless. By the time James had lugged the box around towards the trainees' tents, Mr. Kazakov was standing by the fire with an M4 assault rifle over each shoulder. "Are they loaded?" James asked, as Kazakov handed him a rifle and half a dozen ammo clips. "Simunition rounds," Kazakov whispered. "The trainees won't be wearing any protective gear, so aim above their heads unless you've got a clear shot at their legs or back." As James crammed the clips into the pockets of his shorts and hooked the M4 over his back, he noticed that Kazakov was wearing thick gloves. "Did you get a pair for me?" James asked. "You should have put them on," Kazakov said, as James turned back towards their tent. "I'm not your mother. Where do you think you're going?" "To get my gloves." "You'll be fine," Kazakov shrugged. "They're only babies." James didn't want to seem weak in front of Kazakov, so he turned back. But his confidence drained when he flipped the lid to unveil 72 overheated vipers. "You undo the zips," Kazakov said. As James crept up to the 4 trainees' tents, Kazakov ripped the pin from the first of 4 smoke grenades hanging from a belt slung over his shoulder. James shuffled along the ground, unzipping the tents, closely followed by Kazakov, who'd push his arm between the flaps of fabric and roll a smoke grenade into some far corner of each tent. None of the trainees stirred. After a parachute jump and a 20-kilometre hike, they were all dead to the world. Once the grenades were in position, Kazakov dipped his gloves inside the box of snakes, grabbed a handful, and began throwing them on the baked earth in front of the tent flaps. "Muck in, James," Kazakov said firmly. Without gloves, James decided that the best strategy was to pick the box off the ground and tip the snakes out. The method was fast and effective, but one of the reptiles had already slithered onto the side of the box. It reared up, swiveled its head, and snapped its jaws shut around James's bare nipple. Jesus! James screamed as the first of the smoke grenades began erupting. Within 10 seconds, all 4 trainee tents were billowing smoke, and within 15, the 7 trainees had scrambled outside, barefoot and coughing. Even at night, the jungle was extremely hot, and the trainees soon found the young pit vipers snapping at their toes and ankles. As they screamed, Mr. Kazakov backed up behind the fire and began shooting at them. The simulated ammunition wasn't lethal, but it was like paintballing on steroids, and you knew all about it if it hit your bare skin. Naturally, the trainees' reaction was to run away from the hail of bullets and the snakes around their tents, but Mr. Kazakov began shouting orders between blasts of gunfire. All trainees, gather your equipment from the tents. Smoke-damaged equipment will not be replaced. I repeat, smoke-damaged equipment will not be replaced. As well as making everything stink, the pungent smoke would do serious damage to the trainees' navigation equipment and would stain their briefings for the following day, making maps and vital sections of text illegible. The youngsters had no option but to brave the smoke, bullets, and snakes and rescue their precious equipment. Meanwhile, James had his own problem to deal with. He should have been standing alongside Kazakov shooting simulated rounds at the trainees, but instead he was in excruciating pain with the fangs of a baby viper embedded in the flesh around his nipple. He twisted its surprisingly rigid body, but the jaws didn't budge. Pulling on the snake just made its fangs tear deeper into his skin, so James grabbed a section of the upper body with each hand, then did a Chinese burn, squeezing with all his might while twisting his hands in opposite directions. It took all his strength, but eventually the viper's backbone fractured and James ripped the bottom half of its body away from its head. He'd assumed that decapitation would make the snake let go, but while its body writhed on the ground, the snake's head remained latched to his nipple. Infuriated, James looked around and saw that the barefoot trainees had come up with a method for clearing the snakes from around their tents. They ducked to the opposite side of the fire from where Mr. Kazakov was shooting at them and pulled glowing sticks out of the embers. While snakes are surprisingly blasé about being ripped in half, they don't like fire and sprang away as the trainees swept their flaming sticks across the ground. As James moved in to grab his own stick, Kevin Sumner became the first trainee to get back inside his tent. As he reached into the billowing smoke, feeling blindly for the chunky canister, one of Mr. Kazakov's simulated rounds hit him up the arse. Powdery yellow paint spattered up Kevin's back as he found his hand wrapped around the hot smoke canister and, with a move he would later swear was accidental, ripped it out of the tent and threw it with all his 10-year-old might towards his tormentor. "I'm sick of you picking on me, dickwad!" Kevin shouted. James didn't hear this because he'd grabbed a dried out palm frond from the fire and he could feel its heat as he brought the flame towards the snake's head. As soon as the flame licked the snake's eyeball, its mouth sprang open and the head briefly joined the body on the floor before James booted it into the flames. After a glance at the blood streaking down his torso, James looked up and realised that the shooting had stopped. The trainees had all thrown their smoke canisters out of the tents and now stood over Mr. Kazakov, who lay unconscious on his back with a cut the shape of a smoke canister on his forehead. "What happened?" James yelled. "I think one of the smoke canisters hit him on the head," a 12-year-old recruit called Ellie said. "Accidentally," Kevin added, "because there's no way I could have seen where he was through all the smoke." James realised he was in charge. "Okay," he said firmly. "If a couple of you help me to drag Kazakov into the command tent, The rest of you had better go back and vent the smoke out of your tents and equipment. Where's Pike and Dana? Kevin asked. Can't they move him? James shook his head. Pike's still on the mainland. Dana's off with the guide, setting up your equipment for tomorrow morning. So you're the only instructor? A tough-looking Irish lad called Ronan smirked. There's 7 of us, and only 1 of you. Grab him! Kevin yelled. And before James had a chance to go for his gun, he had a trainee latched onto each arm while another knocked him down from behind with a karate kick to the back of his knee. Tie him up! Ellie squealed. He's 3rd Dan black belt. You can't let him get loose. The 7 trainees were a lot smaller than James, but they'd all done combat training, and they worked together to pin him to the ground. Within seconds, several trainees had run into the command tent. There's tons of grub in there, Kevin shouted as he emerged holding a length of climbing rope. You're all going to get punished for this, James screamed. You'll all fail training. We're showing initiative, Ronan giggled, digging his knee into James's back as he tightened the rope around his wrists. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? It's true, James, Kevin nodded. And besides, Cherub is always short of agents. There's no way they'd fail all 7 of us. We'll see, James said, trying to sound cocky even though he knew the youngsters were right. Physically, basic training was as tough as when James had done it 3 years earlier, but Mr. Pike wasn't especially scary, and the trainees got away with stuff you wouldn't have dared even think about when Mr. Large ran the show. There were a couple of boys who weren't involved in tying James up, and they were clearly worried about getting in trouble. Help me out, James begged. I'll make sure that you get off easy. But the 2 trainees were indecisive. They weren't the strongest characters within the group, and they were outnumbered 5-2. Then a shout came up from inside the command tent. I found a cooler box full of chocolate and Coke! The trainees' evening meal had been an evil-smelling bowl of fish head soup, and the thought of chocolate made up the waverers' minds. James was now lying face down, with grit coating his bloody chest. He tried wriggling, but the trainees had made a decent job of trussing his arms and legs, and there was no chance of escape. I can't believe you're doing this to me, James yelled, as the sound of a kids' party erupted from inside the command tent. I'm always looking out for you guys. Don't expect any favours out of me from now on. James heard Ronan's grubby feet scuffing through the dirt behind him. The boy crouched down and waved the chewed-up end of a Snickers bar under his nose. Fancy a bite? He chirped. You bloody wait, James growled. Temper, Ronan grinned as he stuffed the remainder of the Snickers bar into his own mouth before rolling the wrapper into a ball and flicking it in James's face.